right, so let's go ahead and get started. We're gonna share our PowerPoint with you in just a moment. But just to introduce you, I wanna say welcome to everybody who's here tonight to our second Colledge talk entitled Parents and Juniors Making the Most of College Planning from Home. I want to give a little shout out to anybody out there in the audience who is not the parent of a current junior or a current junior themselves, but maybe is a little bit younger. Really, the information tonight is geared towards absolutely anybody who has not yet applied to college. So hang tight, stay tuned in, and you're going to get a lot of information. So a little bit of introductions here. My name is Kelsey Torosyan. I am the admissions manager at Colledge. I also happen to be an admissions reader for a highly selective institution, and that work helps me and all of us keep our finger right on the pulse of what is happening now in college admissions and how admissions readers are really looking at those packages. What are they thinking about? So that really helps inform all of that work. A little bit about Colledge. For you who do not know who we are a private college consulting company. We're a team of experienced college admissions professionals. We work really closely with families, with students, all the way on and anywhere on their path to higher education. Our work not only helps students to identify and apply to those best fit colleges, but it also helps them uncover those passions, figure out who they are, and ignite that potential within them. Couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First of all, I want to let you know this session is being recorded. We're going to go ahead and post it on our social media, on Facebook and on YouTube later. And so if you haven't yet followed us on social media, please make sure to do so. If you know of anybody who would have loved to be here tonight but wasn't able to make it, be sure to send them over to our social media pages where they can watch tonight's recording in full. A couple of other things, we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So if you have a question, go ahead and hover your mouse over the screen. You'll see that a menu at the bottom of your screen will pop up and one of the icons says Q&A, and you can go ahead and ask any question there throughout the presentation and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. I want to go ahead and launch a poll, which if you guys could take a minute to answer. We want to just get a little bit more information about who's here tonight and what they're thinking about. So take a moment to go ahead and answer the poll about your student's graduation year, or if you're a counselor, educator, or another person, and what you're most interested in hearing about, what you're wanting to learn about tonight so that we can make sure that we really address everything that everybody is wondering about.
Okay, we're going to give a few more minutes because people are still replying.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I think everyone just replied, so I'm just going to end the poll. Okay, one more person. And we can share the results.
Okay, great. So I see a vast majority of people here tonight are thinking about current juniors, which is great. We've got a couple of younger students, a couple of counselors. We've got a lot of interest in test planning and college lists and some other things. So I'm anticipating your questions at the end of the presentation. Now, without further ado, I want to tell you about who is going to be talking to you tonight. Very exciting. So first we have Jenny Umhofer, who is the owner and founder of Colledge. She is really, hi Jenny. She's such an admissions expert. She has been in this field since 1996. She's worked at places like UCLA, Scripps, Caltech. So after a long career in the field, she really started to see that students needed more, that families needed more. They needed more support. They needed some demystification of the process. And so she founded Colledge and came up with this brilliant idea for a team approach. We really do things uniquely, and it's all thanks to her. So we're running strong after 10 years, and it's great to welcome her as our speaker. We also are so excited to be inviting a guest speaker, Matt Steiner, who is the Director of Outreach. He's a Senior Director at Compass Education Group. They work here in Beverly Hills, California. A little bit about Matt. Prior to joining Compass, Matt obtained their MA from the University of Chicago. They have over a decade of experience in the field of test prep. Matt has worked as an instructor, a consultant, a keynote speaker, and I can tell you that Matt is truly an expert, and they are really going to direct us when it comes to what's happening with tests, how you need to be thinking about that, and what it means to go test optional. So welcome, Matt. We're so excited to have you here tonight.
It's a privilege. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Wonderful. So Paloma is going to go ahead and start the presentation. She's going to share her screen and we'll get going.
Welcome to our second free Colledge talk. I'm just honored to be with you tonight in this moment of your child's educational journey. I hope that some of the tools and tips we share tonight will be useful over the next few weeks as you help your student narrow down their college options and make informed decisions about their test plans for college admissions. I'd like you to walk away with better resources and better information tonight so that you can make the best choices for your family in light of the challenges you may be facing with COVID-19 shelter-in-place mandate. Next slide.
Great. So before we really get going, I want to draw your attention to some handouts that you should have gotten from an email through Eventbrite before we started tonight. One of those handouts is a glossary. This includes a number of terms which very likely are familiar to you at this point, but maybe things that have gone without a particular definition for you thus far. And I want to just draw your attention to that and to a few specific terms that we will be talking about that will come up tonight. Number one, demonstrated interest. Demonstrated interest is the measurable degree to which a student shows their interest in a particular university or college. So that might be by going to the campus and visiting or doing a virtual tour. The next thing I want to talk about that that's going to come up a lot tonight is test optional. So what is a test and optional college? That is a college or university that does not require an ACT or SAT score in their admissions packet. Test flexible is fairly similar, but it's not straight up optional. It's kind of conditional, where some students submit, some don't, and some need to. The last one that we're really going to go into is holistic review. Holistic review is a term that we use to describe the way in which most universities and colleges will look at an application package. They look at it as a whole person. We're going to get into that later, so I'm not going to get too deeply into that. So next slide, please. Wonderful. So before I hand things over to Jenny and Matt, I want to make sure that everybody is up to date on what is happening in the world of higher education and test prep in the wake of the pandemic. First of all, a couple of weeks ago, we heard a huge announcement from the University of California system that they will be going test optional for the 2020-2021 admission season. The other thing that we heard from the UC system is that they're going to be temporarily suspending their minimum GPA requirement for the A through Gs. If you look at your glossary, you'll see what A through Gs are. Now, test optional has been a huge trend right now. We've seen more than 50, probably closer to 100 colleges announce that they're going test optional permanently or temporarily just in the last month alone. You have a big range there. You've got University of Oregon on one hand, which has announced that it is going permanently test optional, and that's done. And then on the other hand, on the other side of the spectrum, you've got schools like Cornell University, which just announced this week that they are going test optional for the 2020-2021 admission season. However, they do expect that students who have already taken the test or who are able to take the test will be submitting those grades. So it is test optional. They want to make sure that students have access, but they still want to see those tests if you can send them. Then about the AP test. So for a while, there were a lot of questions coming up. What's going to happen with the AP test if we can't take that in person? So College Board has announced that they will be condensing that test from a 2-hour in-person test to just a 45-minute long remote at-home test that can be taken actually on any device that can access the internet, including a phone, including a tablet. So they're really doing a good job of thinking about access. Of course, that brings up other questions, which I'll leave to Matt later. pass-fail considerations. So some of you may be at high schools that are in the situation that they need to change from a traditional A through F grading system and go over to a pass-fail or pass-no-pass system. And there were a lot of questions coming up. Will this affect our ability to apply? And the answer is no. Everybody is facing this, and colleges are being really flexible. Harvard was the first one to announce they will be taking those pass-no-pass, pass-fail grades. It will change the way that your transcript looks, but we'll get into that later also. The last thing that I want to give you a plug for, since this is a presentation that is mainly towards making the most of college planning in a time that you can't necessarily step foot on a campus, as those of you who are thinking about how do I decide, how do I know enough about a college, I would recommend that you go onto the college website, any college that you're interested in, go to their admissions page and check out what they have to offer now. They're really expanding their offerings online, from the traditional virtual tours to schools like Bard that is offering virtual teach-ins and virtual performances that you can attend, where you can really get a sense of what this college is like. So that's it for the news, and I'll hand it over to Jenny. Next slide.
Thanks so much, Kelsey. I really appreciate you spending some time on the news. There's so much going on. I think we're, riveted by the amount of information that's coming through our listservs and our news channels on college admissions. So if you even have a glimpse of what's been happening, it might be very confusing. So I appreciate you going through that, Kels. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I just want to take a moment and say to parents and students, especially juniors, hang in there. During a moment in high school that is typically already stressful enough, you're facing a unique set of circumstances, perhaps with online Google Classrooms, AP test confusion, maybe you had been prepping for a test that got canceled, not to mention some maybe unforeseen health, safety, and financial challenges that are happening with your family. I just want to say we know that this is an especially challenging time for you, and I want to encourage you to ask for help, get support during this time, and you're not alone. It's okay to reassess your priorities with college and get help during this time. Your health and your wellness, basic family needs are important so that you can meet your college goals. If you can stay open to finding new ways through these challenges, I know there will be a path for you. Okay, next slide. The spring GPA, staying the course. Turning our attention now to your first steps on your path to college, I'd like to start with spring semester of junior year. So everything in your young life has led you to this moment, and you should be proud. In my conversations with colleges lately over the last few weeks, I'm hearing how committed colleges are to reaching students like you where you are. Like Kelsey mentioned, allowing pass, no pass, or pass-fail grades on the transcript. That's unheard of. That's never been allowed before. Emphasizing letters of recommendation that can shed some light on your student performance is also going to be, a consideration that colleges will make. And also all of this news about going test optional. So I would encourage you to stay the course with your schoolwork. Your most important job right now is to stay in school and do your best. And that's going to be really, really important, because your overall GPA in many college cases will have an extra weight this year. So that's my piece of advice for your GPA right now. Next slide. And I thought I'd share this inspirational quote from Albert Einstein. It's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer. And I love this quote so much because it really does speak to all of us have this potential to be challenged and to, sort of give up. And I will encourage you right now to try not to give up. Stay with your problems, even the biggest ones. I love talking about sort of math problems on all levels, algebra, geometry, or even higher level calc, linear algebra. Those students who stay with math problems longer, they hit a wall, right? And then if they hang in there, then they get over that wall. Even students at Caltech, even grad students, you know, part of it is about hanging in there, and they get over the hump. Next slide. So challenging your mindset. What should you focus on in terms of college planning to help you make the most of this time? Carol S. Dweck's book, Mindset, has a powerful message that can be applied now. I would encourage you to check it out if you don't know it. She talks about how our approach and our thoughts can actually shift our entire experiences with learning, anything really. And it's through an intentional awareness of our limiting thoughts. Let's say it is a math problem or learning how to drive, that our own thoughts can get in our own way. But by shifting these internal messages that we're telling ourselves, it actually shifts the brain's neural pathways and trains the brain to have a different, more desirable outcome, even when it comes to seemingly insurmountable challenges. So a little nod to Carol Dweck. Next slide. So using your time differently, what can you do? I want to give you some workaround ideas for you to consider, and feel free to write down notes. Let's think creatively. Let's think differently. Next slide. So we put together these cute graphics to kind of illustrate, you know, the different areas that you want to think about during this time. You know, look around. The first one I put down was service opportunities. What new avenues of service can you engage with, even from home? I think that, you know, given what I mentioned earlier about colleges really wanting to reach students like yourself, are there things that you can help your parents with? Honestly, chores, laundry, cooking, babysitting, anything, going, you know, grocery shopping with a mask, especially for your elderly neighbors, or offering to cut the grass, connecting with the elderly, you know, through Zoom or through other forms of communication. Maybe you're going to make masks. Think about service opportunities in a different way right now. You might not be able to engage in the way that you were before, but there's lots of workarounds here. The next one is virtual extracurriculars. So many of you are musicians, athletes. Are there ways that you can continue these activities online? Athletes, you know, I was listening to some coaches talk recently about, you know, Division I, Division III athletics, and for colleges to be able to see your skills. You can still do sort of skill-based videos even on a phone, very simply, you know, in your backyard. So are there other ways that you can continue your extracurricular activities virtually? Next one is creating your resume. This is something that we help our students do, because a resume is really a culmination of your work thus far. It could be activities, it could be any job experience or internships, or it could be a whole host of things. But actually just spending some time, Google has some great templates. Just create your resume. It's an actual document that you can bring to college interviews, and you can use when you're filling out your college applications. And then I thought it might be prudent to, you know, do a little pitch of online college courses. So in my work as an admissions officer, one of the things that I found was that students who took college courses, even if they were online, it showed a level of depth, a level of, you know, stepping outside of the high school environment to pursue something. It doesn't have to be even highly academic. It could be maybe logo design or accounting. Maybe you want to take C++ or a business class or even an art class. And if it's offered online, how great for you to sort of expand your horizons with academic areas. And then finally, I thought maybe, you know, a couple of ideas could be thinking locally, thinking about family and neighborhood. Everyone can use a hand right now, everyone. So look for new ways to engage with others or provide assistance in other ways. Your peers, younger peers, elderly, you know, we're all struggling. So, you know, think about your community and try to reach out. You can also use your time differently. I want to share a secret with you, because what's happening on college campuses, they're so eager to connect with you, their future applicants. I think that you're really in the driver's seat right now. And I did provide in the handouts that you have, I did provide a recent handout that was put together by IECA, which is the Independent Educational Consultants Association. It's called What Colleges Look For in High School Students, and there's the top 12. So I recommend that you take a look at that to get some ideas for how to kind of think long-term about planning. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's talk about your time frame here. So rising seniors have time to plan. Rising juniors have plenty of time. Deadlines are actually not until you can see those red little circles, November and December. So you've got this, right? Today is April 23rd, and after school gets out, you have June through August to get ahead of the curve. And as we look at this calendar, I thought it would be prudent to offer some, you can see January's gone, February, March, April, but you've got time. So I want you to make the most of your time. And so I thought it would be good to start by talking about testing. So Matt Steiner from Compass Education Group, I know Kelsey already introduced, is someone I greatly admire, someone who thinks critically about test landscape and will now speak to you about the important test planning considerations. Take it away, Matt.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm super stoked to be able to chat with you this evening. It's been difficult to sleep over the last few weeks because of the unbelievably rapid pace for which the testing world has been changing. As it was alluded to earlier, the test optional movement has gotten major steam. And by the way, Kelsey caught me. So this is indeed mint tea. It is not bourbon, I promise you, although you probably wouldn't judge me for drinking right now. One of the things that I do in my work is try and help families identify the correct posture that they should be taking towards college admission testing. And I speak at high schools across the country. And because I've worn multiple hats, I can speak to a little bit of the mechanics of these tests, how they're used within the admissions process, what's so reliable about them, and then also what's become more complicated, just the nuances of policies they're adopting from institutions that require or recommend the SAT or the ACT, those that have gone test optional, those that require or recommend subject tests, the test flexible world. So there's a lot of confusion which can make the path forward for you as an individual family more difficult to divine. And of course, within the year of the pandemic, things have been thrown for a loop even more. Some of the TBDs that you may be hearing about, and you can go ahead and just animate to the end, there's 10 of them here. And they kind of piggyback on one another. So unfortunately, you may be one of those students in class of 2021 who was planning to sit for an exam this spring. And as it stands, we know College Board canceled both the March, the May, and the June SATs. ACT is still holding out, waiting until early May to announce whether or not the June ACT will be canceled, although I would say pretty obvious that it's going to happen, okay? There's also potentially summer test dates, and College Board has also announced an additional test date on top of their sequence for September. There's another question that's posed here, another TBD. If remote online testing is proposed, how do colleges respond to equity concerns? So both College Board and ACT have alluded to the fact that if schools do not reopen in the fall, that online SATs, e-versions of those exams, subject tests, ACTs will be available. The litmus test for this has already happened with regard to the APs, which is this point number 4, in that we have the week of May 11th, AP exams that are being beamed in basically virtually. Students will be able to take them from home all at the same time, regardless of where they live. There's a very specific rigid calendar for taking these exams, so that way there isn't cheating or the sharing of responses or questions in different time zones, depending on where students live. And based on those results, the feedback, colleges also, not just for the APs, but if we do go the route of having these virtual exams, there's questions about integrity. And we're seeing this also on the side of the transcripts, let's say, which have been up to this point, of course, seen as, if not the most critical factor in determining academic readiness for college for many admissions offices. The loss of grade evaluations versus pass-fail, and similar stuff is happening with with testing for those students that might not have the option to take an exam. And as it was said earlier, there's been just this choir of voices coming forward and saying, of course, we will understand students from the context from which they're emerging, they're applying, that you will not be disadvantaged as a result of not necessarily having a test score if you weren't available, or if your school decided to go the route of pass-fail. What about registration deadlines? What are the makeup test dates for the SAT and the ACT scheduled? ACT has announced, for example, backstop dates, although this isn't going to be particularly useful for the June and July versions of their test, which are taking place a week after the originally scheduled dates. This was made in response to more traditional disaster planning. So if there's tornadoes, hurricanes, things like that, obviously with a longer term pandemic, it doesn't make as much sense. When are online test dates confirmed for the SAT and ACT? That is a big TBD. I would expect more announcements to roll in as we reach the end of this semester and perhaps into the summer. And then what is the demand for testing this summer and fall, and will early decision deadlines be pushed to accommodate testing delays? So that first one, there's going to be a tremendous amount of pent-up demand, we think, with regard to tests. Students who were already enrolled or signed up for a June administration of the College Board's SAT, for example, are supposed to get priority with these upcoming dates, right? So one of the things that we're saying to our families is register for exams as soon as you can for the available test dates, and also counter to what Compass's traditional advising is, which is be efficient in your work, prep for one test and not the other, although that is certainly generally what we believe when it comes to sitting for the exams themselves. It might be best to have a seat reserved for one test or the other. And because the exams are conceptually aligned in a way that they really weren't historically, starting with the unveiling of the March 2016 version of the SAT. It looks a lot like the ACT. They're more like close cousins these days. Dividends can be paid off by prepping for one test and then sitting for the other. So I don't want to throw that out as an impossible option. And then that last piece, yes, of course, colleges have already talked about potentially pushing back early decision deadlines in order to have more test dates potentially submitted from students, leading all the way until November or December. So stay tuned for more of those announcements. And at the end of the presentation today, we'll share resources that Compass is amassing about this repository of additional test date information, AP, and test optional. Okay, next slide, please. So I've already touched on these. You can animate to the very bottom. Within the universe of tests, of course, there is the SAT made by the Testing Titan College Board. ACT Inc. makes the ACT. There's also these funny little hour-long assessments that you may be familiar with called subject tests that dovetail fairly nicely with honors or AP coursework. Right now, the admissions world has mostly shifted in disfavor toward the subject tests. At this point, there is only one college in North America, McGill, that requires the subject tests, and only if the SAT is submitted and then must be paired with subject tests, you can submit an ACT to McGill and it will take care of that. And one of the reasons why there's been this dissipating of policies is that some of the previous staunch advocates of the subject tests at the STEM programs du jour that we know and love, that Jenny once represented, Caltech, MIT, Harvey Mudd, is they've essentially gone test blind with a subject test. That they've found that there's other pieces of information in the application, like the last most advanced course that a student took in the STEM field, that's more useful than these hour-long assessments, all right? So there are still some colleges that consider or recommend the subject tests, but given the state of affairs today, I would say forego the subject tests in favor of sitting for an SAT or an ACT. There is more than ever before, I think, a spectrum of reasonable behaviors around testing. On the one hand, you could have students at one pole who are like, I do not even want to mess with exams, okay? That there's enough going on in our lives on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're familiar, if you studied that as a psychology undergrad, there's far more pressing things like, our financial and food security, our loved ones, our health, obviously, that take precedence over something like college admission testing. However, on the other side, the other pole, I guess, is a student who is aware of the fact that tests are a constant in an area of uncertainty, where there's going to be a lot of fuzziness on the application and potentially with the transcript, even though colleges, of course, are supremely empathetic to students that might have had transcripts that are going pass-fail. So you may have noticed that, like with Cornell, with suspending their test optional policy and some of the fine language that they've parsed out, is that for the majority of applicants to highly selective colleges, whether or not they be national universities or liberal arts colleges, are planning to submit test scores. And the more selective they get, the higher the average test scores tend to be. So there's a little bit of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I think, that goes out there, depending on where it is that you're applying, that you may be, even though the policy is listed as test optional, it might technically be more like test recommended or test highly favored, or there might be other institutions that are like test no big deal. So again, you'll work with your counselors, perhaps a teammate at Colledge that can help you understand the nuances between that. And then lastly, as I said, there are resources at Compass that we can share with you later. You can go on to the next slide. And I think that there's this is a good case study for what I'm trying to get to with the UC system, which lots of folks got super excited about them announcing that policy. And I think it was the right way to go. It's what most colleges are doing, and wanting to relax the terms of eligibility when it comes to applying to institutions because of again, the contextual issues that you're facing, the limiting factors. But the UCs, up until even this year, far had a number of applications that dwarfed the number of admits. They were highly selective, especially some of the campuses like Berkeley, UCLA, UC San Diego. And although the relaxing of these standards of eligibility, you'll see, I think, a driving up of the number of applicants, so an outsized pool prior to other years, and then potentially a higher degree of denials and less admissibility, higher selectivity, because of not just test optional, but families that are looking at in-state tuition more favorably, not wanting to take risks financially, travel anxiety and wanting to stay in-state. And also because in some ways, I think California within the national context has modeled good behavior with managing the pandemic. So maybe if there are out-of-state students applying to the UC, it's because we've done a good job of managing what we can. So in any other year, it's already difficult, I would say, to apply and get into some UCs. It might be even more competitive this year because of some of these factors. Next slide. And this is also paralleled not just at large publics that have gone this route of test optional, but also at some of the flagship, highly selective national universities that have endorsed this policy, like the University of Chicago, which had its first class admitted this past fall. And you can see we did a little bit of a case study for U of Chicago. They doubled down on their diversity and inclusion initiatives and offering full scholarships for families earning less than $125,000. And as a partial testament to their success going test optional, the number of first-gen and low-income students have risen by 20% that are enrolled or matriculating. 10 to 15% of the freshman class did not submit test scores. So you can see, in spite of the announcement, it's only a very small margin of students that truly opt for this. And one of the things I think that's important to mention is that when you look at the review process, and again, I'm stepping a little bit out of turn, this is more Kelsey and Jenny's expertise, but when you talk about holistic review of the application, I think it was said fairly well by Jonathan Burdick at Cornell last week in a webinar that he was a part of, that those areas of the application in the absence of some of these constants that they're used to seeing, GPAs and test scores, those other parts of your application that are true for you become that much more important and are scrutinized with greater detail. So students are expecting, again, to have some of those other areas, if they're submitting them in the absence of test scores and transcripts, to be that much more important and immaculate. And of course, this last little piece here, approximately 50% of submitters achieved a 1500 or better, so stratospheric test scores in spite of the policy. Next slide, please. Okay. And we have yet to get this data, but I think it also says or poses a greater question about truly, is this a policy about access? We don't yet have the number from U of Chicago, the percent of non-submitters that were admitted and matriculating who are Black or Latinx, male or female, low SES or high SES, awarded financial aid or full pay. And when we look at the response, I guess, at the end of this cycle with so many colleges that have gone the route of test optional. And right now, I think there's around 70 of the top 100 US News and World Report ranked liberal arts colleges, close to around 38 national universities. What does this really bear out in their admissions numbers? Are they really able to admit more students in a way that they hadn't previously from different demographic groups? I would say that the test optional movement for most colleges right now that within the last few months have jumped on this bandwagon, it's more of a concession in trying to be, again, fairer to students and less indicative of a philosophical or institutional shift in how the test should be utilized, which is why so many colleges have also announced not just going either test optional for this year, but perhaps a 3-year or 2-year pilot, rather than going test optional indefinitely. Next slide. And you have some funny stuff like this. So go ahead and yeah, this is just echoing the same point. So Dean Jim Nondorf, who is a great guy, and this isn't to de-emphasize the great work that U of Chicago is doing, but he was videotaped on an iPhone during a hoity-toity luncheon at a Credit Suisse in Manhattan, and was talking about how this was the most selective class they've ever had in spite of the test optional movement. And so you see these trends with a greater number of applicants, the admit rate level can lower, and also because students who had initially maybe decided to submit bad apple test scores now don't have to worry about sending in that blemish on their application and can curate those scores out, making the highest average SAT and ACT scores higher than ever before. So Dean ends up getting a little bit of an extra pep from the alumni, the boards at U of Chicago, who were maybe concerned that a drop in selectivity would hurt the University of Chicago. The opposite has happened. Next slide. And Jenny.
Thanks so much, Matt. That University of Chicago case study is exceptionally helpful right now. I did have a chance this past week to speak with my colleagues at Scripps College, and the director of admission was telling me a little bit about how they're going to be reviewing applicants, in the future. So at Scripps College, they went test optional permanently. So there's no going back. They're not going to do any pilots. They had already been thinking about it, discussing it, and then this pandemic just pushed them over, and they decided to announce this is it, we're doing it. And interestingly enough, Wellesley just announced as well, Wellesley's doing a pilot, but so I like that Scripps College was the first women's college, just because I worked there. So anyway, she was talking about the holistic review at Scripps, and we use that term a lot. Kelsey referenced that at the beginning in the glossary. So a holistic review is looking at a lot of different factors of a student's profile. So it's not just GPA and test scores. Holistic means that they're going to look at maybe letters of recommendation, the essays, the personal characteristics, the qualities that are presented in the application in a broader sense. So by doing that, this is a unique sort of process that we in the United States admissions, we do this differently than other countries that are really more numbers driven. So holistic is really allowing the student to have potential and to present that potential in other sort of intangible ways. So the rigor in grades, the rigor on the transcript is really important. So that means, if the school offered APs and honors, did the student take advantage of them? And then of course the grades in those classes. Of course, one of the pieces of counseling that's really helpful here is to take classes that you can be successful in. So, you know, taking classes that are, taking all the APs is not necessary. And in fact, there's a point of diminishing return. You don't need to take more than 5, 6, 7. There's been research that has shown, you know, too many APs don't really help you in admissions. And then of course the grades, and getting B's and A's in those APs more rigorous curriculum is preferable. Another area is the, if, you know, she talked about if, you know, a student does submit test scores, and that would be something that, you know, we would counsel our students on, you know, individually with each college, whether to submit the scores or not, depending on what their scores are, if they end up taking the test. She was saying that if they do, then they really want to be at, with the SATs, you know, 600 plus, on the upper 600 range for submission for real competitive consideration. And then another point in the holistic review is, okay, so at Scripps College, they have something called core curriculum, and they have core 1, core 2, and core 3. So all first year students take core 1 together. It is team taught by 10 faculty, and it is an incredible sort of spectrum of almost like you know, getting a taste of a lot of different areas that maybe as a young high school student you would never have thought of majoring in. Or so the core 1 is very rigorous. It is a it's a class that really helps young women develop their critical thinking skills. And through this core 1 class, they demand writing every week. So it's you have significant writing requirements. So the writing skills in the application will be heavily weighed as well. And the sort of along the same lines, the common application essay and the supplements, the director mentioned that the supplements are not going to change for anyone who's considering Scripps College. The same prompts will be used this year. And so one of the prompts that is asked is about, you know, sort of going in a time machine and going to a different place in time, and where would you go and who would you meet, what would you do? So really taking time with that essay and thinking about how you want to respond is going to bode well, you know, in the long run. And, you know, Scripps is really a hyper intellectual yet very supportive environment. So the kinds of students that want that environment are going to be well read, essentially, within this holistic review. Okay, next slide. Okay, so finalizing your college list. This is really your roadmap when you think about it. So I put down a couple of bullet points here for you to jot down. But, you know, the list development is something that takes time, you know, and not being able to visit the campuses like Kelsey mentioned earlier can be a little bit of a challenge, but there are workarounds. So a couple of things you might want to do in terms of your research when you're looking at colleges is think about those core drivers, what's inside. The major can sometimes be a core driver. Location, you know, of course, with the uncertainty right now, perhaps you will want to consider more colleges that are local. So that could be the best fit for your family and you right now. Size, you know, that's always a consideration. Should you attend a big school with a lot of research opportunities and a lot of resources with faculty, or is a small liberal arts or a smaller setting or mid-sized setting better for you? Cost can be a factor too. I know that colleges are working very hard to help those families that have, you know, senior students and are trying to make their final decision right now with finances. Maybe there's been some changes with the income of the family, so they're trying to work on that. But cost could be a factor for you to consider and keep on that, you know, on that research spreadsheet. Other factors that could be, you know, in your consideration could be, you know, school spirit or the social element. You know, how friendly are the peers on the campus? What kind of internships do they have for students in summer? And maybe career focus. Are the faculty available to you? What kind of housing do they provide for students? You know, that's another, sometimes can be a core driver. Do you want to live in a triple, or are you comfortable, you know, with whatever they give you? You know, we've heard over the years, many students really care about food and, you know, can they be kosher? You know, is there a Whole Foods close by? Is there a Chinese, really good Chinese food? So, you know, what are the factors that are really going to resonate with you? Those are going to be your core drivers for your best fit colleges, right? And of course, you're going to think about admissibility, but, you know, it's also important to kind of ignore that a little bit sometimes, so that you can look at the more objective fit pieces, what makes you a good fit for that college, and the college a good fit for you. Another consideration is, how many colleges should you apply to? Our best advice for the list is, you know, I think you can really do well with 10 colleges. 8 to 10 is just fine. Anything more than that, sometimes you can really burn out on essay writing and too much application work. So I think 10 is great. Some students we work with only apply to 5, and if they're really well handpicked 5 colleges, then they can get into all of them. And then college fairs is another way to pursue research and help you finalize your list. There's a lot of virtual college fairs right now. So there's a big one that's usually done at the Pasadena Convention Center. So that obviously won't happen this month, but there is a Western Association for College Admission Counseling has a virtual fair that's going on. You can just look that up online and see if you can take advantage of that one. And there's also national ones. So Google is your friend. And then of course there's online research. There's a lot of different platforms for online research. We have a platform we use with our students. Many high schools have what's called Naviance. I highly recommend you learn how to use Naviance if you're at a high school that has it and provides it. And then virtual tours and information sessions are abound, as Kelsey mentioned. So take advantage of those. You know, these actually, if you attend them, if you sign up online and you attend them, this is a way to demonstrate interest. And I know that was a term on the glossary that we talked about earlier. Colleges, believe it or not, are tracking if you have attended a tour in person, or in this case, virtually, and have a way of a method. Many colleges have a way of looking at that data. It's a big data in college too. So those information sessions are important to help you learn about the colleges and for the colleges to know that you are interested. And then finally, you know, to really reach out to the admissions officers directly. You know, they are there to help, and emailing them, you know, even on a personal level, just talk about, you know, yourself. That's where you can really start to finalize your list and get the answers to the questions you have. I would also recommend creating a calendar and give yourself a deadline to decide on your college list. We found that students who apply early on, or where they know where they're going to apply early on, have more time to spend on the applications. So, you know, I think June is a really good time to decide where you're going to apply. Okay, next slide. So once you finalize the college list, you'll want to make the most of summer months coming up to get ahead with essay writing. We have these great essay boot camps and webinars at Colledge. They start in July and they go through November. And they're really Saturday 2.5-hour intensives that we have limited space available, but these are for our students to get immediate feedback on the essays that they're writing for college admissions. And we have essay specialists facilitating and offering that immediate feedback to keep them moving ahead. They get a lot of work done in these essay boot camps. We also have the webinars are sort of bookended with the boot camps. And we found the webinars that we are offering this year are topic driven, like, you know, top 3 elements of a successful essay, for example, or how to hook your admissions reader. So a little bit of learning about how to write the essay is helpful before you sit down to do it. And we found that actually in our feedback of current senior students and families, Our clients are reporting that they spend somewhere between 15 and 30 hours outside of our meetings on their own time writing essays, but on the first draft, on the first essays that they write, like Common App essay, UC personal insight essays, and those supplements. There is a fee to attend our boot camps, but if you're not our clients, but once you attend one boot camp, you have access to all of our essay webinars, which is great. So next slide. So college planning works. We have individualized, high quality, tailor-made service that works. We work individually with students and families on their college admissions process. We offer a wide range of plans to work with a whole host of different students and families. We work with athletes, we work with artists, we work with students who are interested in STEM. We work with students that are undeclared, humanities-based, and those essay boot camps I mentioned and essay specialists are there to empower students with tools and the foundation to write their way into college. This is going to be the year to write and really write from the heart, and refine the writing, do more drafts. So through our listening phase, we get to the heart of your child and we really help them to identify those best fit colleges when they, not just for them to get into the colleges, but for them to thrive. That's our goal. Next slide. So you can see, as a result of our robust service, our clients experience great success. We've had, there are more than just these few colleges that we have data for, but you can see that UC Berkeley, when we've worked with students, they're getting in at a 46% rate, where the school's admit rate is 16.8%. USC, 42%. 42.4, and their overall admit rate is 11.4. UCLA, we've got a 34.8, and the overall school is 12. Northwestern, we seem to have a lot of students interested in Northwestern lately, 22%, in comparison to 6.4%. And then Stanford, that is really a hard school to get into, 18% working with us. And of course, we're counseling students. So don't get too misled by this data. We're counseling students on best fit to begin with, and we're helping you understand, what are the criteria and how these colleges are going to read you differently. So that gives you a sample. Next slide. Okay, so we've got our handouts. Check your inbox. If you signed up for our Colledge talk a little bit late tonight, you should have gotten an email before we started. And we do have this glossary that Kelsey mentioned at the beginning. We have this college planning checklist, which has 9, 10, 11, and 12. Just great tips and advice on what to focus on each year. And then Matt, I'll let you talk a little bit about these two items.
Yeah, definitely. Very briefly. So we compile at this point, it's a 100+ page guide to college admission testing that goes through all of these differentiating policies that I had alluded to. Also things like modifications to the test optional movement, who's joined, who's left, whatever. All of that is contained within the guide. Don't try and read it all at once. It's more of an encyclopedic reference. And then also, if you're interested more specifically in how COVID-19 is impacting both testing and admissions, we have a rapidly evolving blog. There's a link to that. And we also have on that piece a webinar with my colleague, Adam Ingersoll, and Jonathan Burdick, the VP of enrollment at Cornell, and then a few other admissions voices and college counselors talking about admissions during the pandemic and highlighting some of the themes that Kelsey, Jenny, and I have already talked about. So it's very useful.
And I also just want to mention that we're offering special discounts because we know that people are a little bit confused. So at Colledge, we're offering some discounts of $100 plus for our initial consultations just for the month of April. So those of you who are interested in learning about our services, please don't hesitate to reach out. Next slide. So key takeaways, just to remember that a strong 9th through 12th GPA is where you want to focus, or 9th through 11th, because colleges won't see 12th grade grades. Using spring and summer for online research. As Matt was doing such a great job at presenting, I think strategic test planning this year will be more valuable and more important than ever. And then summer essay advantages, taking advantage of the time that you do have at home to write your heart out, and emailing admissions officers. They want to help. So without further ado, we have some questions. There's our contact information if you need it, but I'll just go ahead and open it up. Kelsey, you can facilitate.
All right, great. So I want to respond to a few questions that we've gotten. I've got some questions that are more appropriate both for Matt and for Jenny, so I'll just let you know. The first one I want to go ahead and address. I have a question coming in that says, can I get my refund for my SAT or ACT? And that is clearly for Matt. So Matt.
So yeah, things have been quite crazy for both College Board and ACT. Yes, if for whatever reason the test date was canceled because of COVID-19, get in touch with the College Board or ACT. Also though, make sure if you did register for a prior test date that was canceled and you want that to carry over to another test date, be mindful that you will get priority enrollment for these new test dates because of a previous cancellation. So if you don't already have, especially if you don't already have as a class of 2021 student, a junior, an initial first full test under your belt, I would say go the option of registering for a new date with whatever the extra incentives are from College Board or from ACT to get you registered sooner, because of the pent-up demand that I was alluding to earlier, that there is going to be far more interest in taking these exams until we have confirmation that online at-home testing is available, okay? So I would say keep it, but if you, yes, absolutely, you can get a refund if you contact the folks at College Board or ACT.
Wonderful, thank you, Matt. Jenny, I think this next one is for you. The question is, colleges are encouraging current seniors to take a gap year. Will this affect the class of 2021 entering at the same time?
So the question is, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand, for colleges are recommending a gap year, or is that students?
So one of our questions is that colleges are encouraging the current seniors to take a gap year, and if this is going to have an effect on the current juniors when they go to enter and when they go to apply.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really like your thinking there. So I haven't heard of colleges encouraging gap years yet, but there are colleges that do have gap year programs. Like Duke has a phenomenal gap year program they offer to all of their students, and in fact even offer scholarship money so students can take a gap year. But each campus is a little bit different in terms of how they handle and manage the gap year. Harvard, I did read that they are not going to extend more than 50 to 100 students a gap year. So, a gap year is very subjective. You do need to have a plan, and it needs to be something that is meaningful and sustained. So that's something that in your proposal to the colleges, if you're a senior, that you need to really flesh it out and make sure it's clear and thorough. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Do you think, Jenny, that if there are
it will affect the juniors?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's going to be hard to answer that, because I think the juniors are going to be facing a whole different experience in their application cycle than the seniors right now. I don't know. I mean, there's only so much space. I think colleges will have to be, vigilant, hyper vigilant about how they manage gap year, how they manage, fall closure. We don't know. And then the junior year, I think the juniors are going to do really well, frankly, because if there are more online options, then maybe beds won't be required for maybe if they have an overage of students enrolling, you know, it's hard to say that far in advance how colleges will unfold their plans. But I would stay tuned. You know, that's a really good question to think about.
Great. I see that there's a message coming through, a little clarification that apparently Penn sent a letter to international ED admits encouraging them to take a gap year. So that's probably part of
okay. Very good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. So that seems to be all we have time for. If you have further questions, do feel free to type your message here. To continue typing messages in the Q&A, we will respond later, and we can include that in the recording, some responses. But before you go, I just need a couple more minutes of your time. We're going to launch one final poll, and if you can take some time to go ahead and answer it, just let us know what you thought of the presentation, and if you would like to hear more information, that would be wonderful. So we're launching this poll now. And while you all are taking the time to vote, I just want to say thank you so much for attending and taking some time to learn more. Hopefully everything we've offered, Matt and Jenny are such great experts and such great speakers. I'm hoping that everybody here is really walking away with a wealth of information, possibly more questions, but more informed questions. So thank you so much, and thank you for answering our poll, and we hope to be in contact with all of you soon. I see there's one more question coming through. Let's look. Yep. Thank you so much, and thank you for your appreciation.
So there's no more questions? I'm sorry.
No, that was it. It was just a thank you.
Okay, so the next slide is the final slide. I just want to say a very special thanks to Matt Steiner from Compass, Kelsey Torosyan, our admissions manager, and our Paloma Beltroy, our coordinator, who makes us look so good. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you who joined us. We wish you the best. Please stay safe and wash hands.
Thanks all. Take care.
Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.